really happy for us to be here today. I think the way we're going to structure this talk is we're going to do a little storytelling first to tell all you guys a little bit about us and who we are and how we got to build what we ended up building, which is none of us are actually creative on our product team. So we're calling it Data Repository. And that's actually essentially a product that empowers researchers to use open data on a virtual environment that we built using JupyterHub. First, a little bit about us and who we are. We are from an organization called the Emerson Collective. The Emerson Collective is a multidisciplinary organization. It's part philanthropy firm, part social venture capital firm, and part tech company. So essentially, we're a social good organization. We have many teams at the Emerson Collective within technology. Us, present here today, we're from the data products team. And what we do is we work with domain experts in the social good space to identify gaps and develop greenfield solutions to amplify the impact of their work and accelerate change. There are many people on our team. We have product managers, software engineers, data scientists. Here today, that's me, Hoang. I'm a product manager on the data products team. And the rest of the product team that's present here today, who's also you'll be hearing from, is there's Luisa. She's a senior software engineer. And Michael Dowd, who's a data scientist. And she's not on the slide, but the director of data is Ada. She's right there. So hi. So cool. So as I mentioned, we are a data products team. And the way that we structure our work is around verticals. And each vertical is centered on one of the very many issue areas that the Emerson Collective really cares about. So our first vertical is actually about being a data products team and knowing that we wanted to work in immigration. First thought about data inside immigration and who works in immigration and who gets and uses data in immigration. So the first thing that we found was that government data is messy. Thinking about immigration and immigration data, we said, hey, we should really hone in on a user group, and that user group should be immigration researchers. Why? Researchers are inherently a data-first user group, right? Data is at the core of a lot of research. On the flip side, one of our first findings with immigration researchers is that they use very little technology in their day-to-day. What do they use? Where do they get their data from? Immigration, as you can imagine, is something that's really regulated and enforced by the federal government. That's just how it is. So all of their data really comes from government sources. Sometimes it comes from web pages. Sometimes it comes from, and there's maybe some different processes in procuring each of these data. And so we talked to the users and we tried to figure out hey, what's that experience like? And some things that we heard from immigration researchers, people from think tanks and academia, was things if some of this data was better accessible, I'd be really interested in expanding my research into different streams. Or I spent a lot of time making data from the government useful. And we were what do you mean? And here are some examples of data sets that are in, around, or about immigration that the federal government makes technically public, but still hard to use. So on the left here, the screenshot, the CBP has information on border apprehensions. It's in a PDF. The PDF is 40 pages, and each of the 40 pages has 40 different tables. And if you want to use it, you have to copy paste it and put it into an Excel sheet and then reformat it all. CBP started publishing some of their data on Tableau dashboards, which, as many of you may know, if you're familiar with Tableau, usually there's an ability to export the underlying data, but they disabled that. So if you want to go and actually see the data, you have to change the parameters and maybe try to copy paste, and it gets a little difficult. So we said, okay, I think there's something to do here. I think there's a technology solution that we can maybe think of to offer immigration researchers. And we decided to dig a little deeper with this user group. I'm not going to go through this entire landscape analysis on how they do their work, but essentially we validated that yes, their biggest pain point in getting their work done is actually accessing usable forms of their data and being able to then therefore manipulate it. And everyone actually in the field does the same work because they're all using the same data sets. And then we said, hey, we did find some of these data sets, there are civic hackers that scrape the data, put it onto data.world. Would you use that? And then there's extra layers on top of just the data itself about community and enforcement of qualities of standards of work that is really core to being a think tank researcher. You have to be able to cite your sources and stand behind your data work. So a lot of users in turn wouldn't use this data set if they saw it at data.world, which was interesting to us. So we said, okay, we're a technology team. Maybe this is not a product solution. Maybe it's just a data science solution or something and we can scrape and clean the data for you. And when we presented that as a solution and said how we did it or how we would, the response that we got back was wait, no, but I would love to do this myself. We're actually really hungry to learn. We're researchers and we love thinking critically, and the immigration research space in itself is actually a little behind. And we would they recognize that and they just are looking ways to upskill actually. Acknowledging that researchers not only need the data, there's a need for transparency, quality control, and also discretion was really important for immigration researchers, probably for all researchers. You don't want to make your work entirely public until you're ready to release it. And acknowledging that there's a large technical skills gap that we see in this user group. So we spec'd out what we thought that this community of users needed, and we landed on these key elements, right? Immigration researchers need a location for useful and usable data sets in immigration within the community of like-minded trusted people that they can trust. It may be something that facilitates the sharing and analysis of these. We decided for our MVP to focus on public data sets rather than FOIA data sets, just because there's like a big process to procuring FOIA data that may or may not be a technology solution. We also wanted to solve for transparency in how we did it. And we also wanted to solve for ways in which users can have a place to go, that they can get the sense that there's a lot of integrity in the data and trust in the data. And we decided as a team to manage the solution that we built. And so we're going to build something to support this community of immigration researchers. So we thought about, okay, what exists out there that would allow us to do this already just off the shelf? If any of you work for the city of New York, you probably sat through a Databricks demo. I know I did when I worked for the city of New York. And exactly, there's Databricks, DataIQ, Snowflake. Google Cloud has like a lot of sub-product offerings that you can actually like use as a cloud-based analytics and AI solution that's like end-to-end, like it can do all that. However, if you're thinking about this user group, immigration researcher, people who work at think tanks, academics, for people who like the groups are small and maybe like the data practice is not really truly that evolved yet, like that might be overkill, like to invest in all that infrastructure and computing power for a use case that like isn't exactly hashed out or like articulated or evolved yet at their organization. So then we said, okay, there are open source tools out there. You can do some of the things that we mentioned, like on Google Colab, Dataseti, or something called Investigate AI is like an initiative by a technologist who's like helping journalists to access data and show how like data is scraped and give transparency around it. But the fact of the matter is like a variety of open tools exist. However, like they do a subset of the requirements that we wanted to solve for. And if you wanted to make an end-to-end solution, you ironically need technologists to do it for you. So that's where we thought there might be a product opportunity for small to medium organizations who can benefit from a low-cost, flexible end-to-end solution that can allow them to ease into more advanced data practices before committing a lot of infrastructure investments. So something that like is a product that is very easy to adopt and could allow the organization and all the people within it to grow their data practice like step by step in a steady pace. I think the next slide is for Luisa.
Hi everyone, I'm Luisa. So we ended up doing many parts. I'm just going to talk high level of kind of how things were set up. Basically, what we started doing was looking at open and unusable data sets specifically within the immigration space. Then we took those data sets and Michael created Jupyter notebooks to be able to highlight how you can pull in that data, process it, and then export it into a usable format, which you can see within the repository as just a CSV file. You can download the output data directly from the repository, but you can also look at the Jupyter notebook to see step by step what happened and how that data was manipulated and changed. We also have admin scripts, which you don't have direct access to. It's something that we also host in GitHub, but we did create a wiki within the repository that outlines how you could recreate this environment for yourself at your own company. So all of this is contained within GitHub, and we will share the link to that later on. And then that syncs into a JupyterHub instance, which we manage using Kubernetes in on a cloud provider. So that could be AWS or Google Cloud as well. So the idea here is to offer different access points based on the need and the technical skill set. What happened? I don't know. Great. Yeah. The screen's on, but it's okay, great. We're back. So basically what we tried to do was offer different access points based on a user's skill set and interests, and also technology skills. So from a admin perspective, these are screenshots. These aren't actually our own screenshots. These are taken from the internet. But basically, as an admin, if you install and utilize JupyterHub native authentication, you can have this type of admin panel where you can see the users that you have on your platform. People can sign up and request access. So you can also authorize users, unauthorized users, and change people's passwords as necessary. And you can also then access their server. So if someone's having an issue with something within their environment, you can access their server and help them debug it as well. So there's a lot of features that just come out of the box by using this authentication method. There are other authentication methods that can be used, but this was one of the ones that we found was the simplest to get started with. Other user considerations that we had to take into account where we understood that an organization may want to host their code or content, so their admin scripts and their Jupyter notebook within JupyterHub or another environment or control, but that could be locked down, so it would be private. And that's not something that is natively supported through a tool that we use called Git Puller, which allows you to periodically sync your repository to the JupyterHub instance that you have installed. Essentially, what that allows you to do is that if you make an update to the repository, that update will then propagate to all the users on your platform. But you can't do that natively syncing to a private repository. So we ended up coming up with a solution that we borrowed from another organization called Repo, which basically allows you to set up like a proxy service where you use the proxy service to request the data from the GitHub repo, passing through secrets and the keys that you need to be able to authenticate. And then the Git Puller service that we use actually pings that proxy service to pull in the latest data. So that was one workaround. The other thing that isn't supported natively by JupyterHub is being able to display markdown files. So if you're familiar with GitHub, when you go into a repository, it'll show you kind of the content of your README, so you can see all of that content. That's not something that's supported natively on JupyterHub. And so we ended up having to install another service to be able to do that. And Michael will show what that looks like for our environment. The other thing is that we wanted to also prevent users from accidentally deleting or editing something and not realizing that it would actually break their Jupyter notebook. And so there's another plugin called Freeze that you install using, and it allows you to freeze notebooks so that if someone wants to go in and edit something, they actually have to actively unfreeze the cell. So it's just a little bit of extra friction to flag for a user, like, hey, should I really unfreeze this? Or should I make a copy of this notebook and edit it on my own environment? And so now we're actually going to do like that.
Cool. Hey, everybody. So I get the enjoyable or terrifying task of doing the live demo. So we've got like 6 different screens and a little bit of code. And so bear with me if things start to go wrong, but let's hop into it. Awesome. So we've talked a lot about what the data repo is. And so I'm going to actually show you what that experience is like. Running code is, what the documentation looks like, where the links are and where the data is and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, my main highlights are the experience of that. I'm going to talk a little, just touch here and there on the little technical details that Luisa mentioned. And I'll spend a good deal of time actually showing an example of walking through a data set in a notebook, specifically about New York City, the School of Data in New York City today. So we're going to do an immigration data set related to New York City, and just sort of show what that kind of output can look like and what that experience is like. So to start, here we are. So we're at Data Repo, the website. I've got a login, and I'm going to click sign in. Fingers crossed. Oh, normally it shows a little status bar that shows that the Kubernetes is spinning up a server. So if I hadn't already signed in to make sure it was working, it would just say that, hey, somewhere in the cloud, spinning up a container. And this is going to mean that then we can step in and run code. And once we get in, anybody that's familiar with Jupyter, we're going to look a lot like a Jupyter notebook that you just spun up, but you click into Data Repo. And here's where we've got some things starting to be a little bit more exciting. And so now we're in the immigration data repo. It's nice. We've got pre-rendered README files. Now, that just means that we actually have like text you can see on the screen and some explanations and stuff like that. And so right here at the top, we've got immigration data repository. We've got some background about the project, just highlighting like what it is, what we're doing. Zoom in a tiny bit. If you're already in here, also, we've got some links to forms. So if you have any questions, if you have additional data sets you want to suggest, because we're looking to expand this, that's great. If you have any code or data sets you already want to share, awesome. And then let's say you weren't signed in here and you were just over in which, as a flag, everything's linked up. So the GitHub looks exactly like the GitHub. The JupyterHub, it's just that it's not executable. There is a request to actually get access. And we'll touch on the GitHub repository at the end as well. So once you're in here, as a sort of getting started, 2 main paths. One is, are you just looking for data? And that's totally fine, and that's great. And we're actually interested in expanding that sort of functionality. And so here we have a data inventory table. Initially, we're releasing, I'd say 5 or 6 sort of data sets where we're showing you like how to process things, how to extract. A good example here is one Dowd mentioned. This is the CBP Southwest land borders, Tableau dashboard. This looks great. Let's download it. Nope. Image, PDF, PowerPoint. That's not going to work. There's also a whole bunch of filters, things like that. And if you want that data, Click see dataset. It's all just stored in the GitHub. There it is. We scrape it once a day. If nothing has changed, we don't save the file. If anything's changed, we update it. So we've been scraping this for a bit, and there's been a number of updates. Click in here, crazy looking CSV file, but it's data. You can open it in Excel. It'll work for you. Cool. Other things is we update it regularly. Oh, I just said that. Yeah, we run it fairly regularly, and we're looking to expand more data sets, things like that. So that's your first sort of entry point. Are you looking for data? Great. If that's it, then feel free to move on and do your research with that. The other thing is, like Dad mentioned, is that folks were like, actually want to know how to do this. And so here's where we start offering some resources to get up and running. So if you want to run code and see what's going on, we first recommend some Python resources. So here is just like some classes, some books, things like that. We just got suggested like kind of crash course into Python to help you get up and running. There's also some stuff on Jupyter and data and like pandas and things like that. Also, if you're just a coder and you like just want the code, then you probably don't even want the JupyterHub. Just pull down the GitHub, spin up your own like local environment, install the requirements, everything will work. So that's the general structure. If we go over here to notebooks, we can see each of the notebooks we have inside of the data repo currently. The thing I'll flag here is that besides being different data sets, we're also trying to flag different or show examples of different techniques and methods for dealing and processing with data. Yes, there's a lot of like pulling data from the internet, but there's things like how do you extract data from a PDF, as Dad mentioned, that big 40-page. How do you extract data from a Tableau dashboard? How do you extract just HTML tables? How do you pull down, like, how do you process mini Excel files with embedded tables? Things like that. So stuff that's like super like time consuming and irritating. And if you've ever worked in Excel, you've done it, but being able to make it reproducible and like cut down the time sink on that. We also have some like interesting stuff here where there's an organization, like the federal government, where every time they release a new data file, they just overwrite the old one. And so somebody was like in the immigration space was like wise enough to tag that in the Wayback Machine. And so we show how to use Python to use the Wayback Machine to grab every version of that file, create a comprehensive data set, stuff like that. Cool. So now for the even more fun bit, I think, we're going to get into an actual notebook. So you get a sense of like content and data that somebody using this might experience. We are going to use an ICE detention data set. This is a FY 2015 data set of folks that were detained by ICE and where they were detained. This data set has a row for every instance of detention. So if you were detained in location A, then moved to location B, and then moved to location C, you would have 3 different rows with information about like each of those stays. You'd ask, why 2015? That was a while ago. They don't release a lot of this data. And so this is like the data set that is available freely on the internet currently. That said, we've talked with folks that have more current versions of this, larger versions of this. This is also something that's not going away. And so researchers, lawyers, advocates, folks like want to know about this kind of thing. And so we think it's like a decent example. Now, okay, every notebook on the data repo has a similar type structure. At the top, we've got some sort of descriptive title. We have a link to the data source. We've got an overview, like general technical approach, skills learned. So like in this one, we're going to download files. We're going to aggregate them. We're going to figure out location stuff. We're going to prep for visualization, explore. Sometimes they're like a little more detailed and technical. Sometimes they're like more just generally what's going to happen. And then we just also have like that sort of metadata, that background. And so this is stuff that's like coming from our data specifically. Just as for context, here's the FOIA ICE library, ICE FOIA library, Freedom of Information Act, in case anybody, forgot it. I do. And this is where folks have requested things repeatedly from ICE through FOIA that they end up releasing things. And so inside detention facility statistics, there's 5 files here that are for this data set. So cool. Hop into it. And so in here, we have all code. Everything's executable. As Luisa mentioned, we try to create that friction from being able to break the notebook. So can't type anything, nothing's going to happen. But if I unlock it, we can go crazy. Our recommendation is always to just file, make a copy, and do what you will with it, which is actually what we want you to do. But then that way it keeps this here. The other thing that is key about this is that if we find an error in this notebook, because it hasn't been updated, when we update your local container, it'll push that update. Everything will be synced, which is also great. In terms of like design pattern, all code is present. So it's like, we don't abstract away things into scripts. Everything that we're doing is present in the notebook so folks can see what's going on. It's still plug and play. You can run the cell. If you want to swap things out, it'll still work. But also if you want to like get your hands dirty and get in there, you can see what's happening. Let's see. Okay. So we download files. I'm not going to do it right now. It takes time. So we're going to pre-run. So it's not like a true code demo, but we'll run code here. Fingers crossed it worked. All right, so here's what our data looks like. These are 2 records from this data set of a person that was detained. I think the main things I wanted to flag are that we have an order of detention. As I said, there's multiple sequences here. So this is order of detention 15 and 16. We also have a unique subject ID. This is helpful. Often they release this stuff without this, so it's helpful that we've got it in here. And then the other thing we've got is location. This location is not an address. It's not a city and a state. I kind of know where this is just because I've been looking at this data. And then you might see some things that look like they've got that information, but generally they actually don't. And so these are just names. And so we're going to actually have to do some work to get like some context about where these places are located. Great. And so that's actually like the main first step. One other thing I'll flag, you just throw some things in here that are like useful tools in Python and Pandas. So Pandas Profiler, super helpful, quick thing to use, summarize your data. If you're coming from Excel and processing data, like seem really nice to see that and be like, oh, wow, this is really easy. We do a little data cleaning, not a surprise. There's some problems. 1,000 records have the same unique subject ID. It's probably not a unique subject ID, so we're going to kick that out. Great. So first challenge, like I said, is facility data. Like we don't actually know where stuff is. So we used one trick, which is where we searched the ICE doclib site. And if anybody's found this before, you can search a site specifically, like only that site, by just typing site : in a Google search bar. And so we searched their ICE doclib site for XLSX files, and I'll just quickly show this. And there we just get Excel files, or Google doing its best, but it's only searching the doclib. And it's kind of serendipity here. We actually had a 2015 ICE detention facility listing data set. So we pull that in. One thing I'll flag, we only got 200 facilities. We've got about 700. That's not enough. We pull in more. So again, this is just part of the process often is like, where do I look? How do I keep looking? Track is a organization out of the University of Syracuse. They do a ton of really amazing data work around immigration. And so they actually also had an HTML table of location. They had city and state, but not address, but that's fine for our purposes. So I show how to pull that in a data frame without copying and pasting. We can use code to do that. And then we'll wave our hands with manual cleaning and other stuff because that often is just part of the process. And the goal here is to figure out what are the locations that are actually in the New York City metro area? And so the goal is to create like an initial list. Now, I decided to go with a fairly broad definition of this. So when I say metro area, I mean it, say within an hour and a half, 2 hours. You can imagine somebody being picked up and transferred to a location in that time. So we're going to say New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. And I find that initial list, and then I just did a little manual review here, kicked out anything that was like definitely upstate. I'm not saying this is perfect. There's a few things in here I'm not sure about, but in general, I think it's things within the region. And once we've done that, we can limit our data set. And so we go from about 700,000 rows to about 16,000 rows. And so now we've got folks, and we limit it to specifically initially detained. So folks that were first detention was in the New York area. Thing I'll flag here is we could have done some fuzzy string matching, some other stuff to link up these facilities. We may still do that if there's demand and people are like asking for that. But for now, I think we're good. So I have 2 main goals that I want to do now that I've got this data set somewhat there. I want to make a map of all the places folks were detained to just see like hotspots of detention for folks that were initially detained in New York. And I also want to look at patterns of transfers in detention. So from like A to B transfers between specific locations. So first off, to do that, I need to make a map. I need to get some coordinates. And so I know I've got stuff like this, where I've got a location, and then I've got a city and a state. So New York City, New York. But I don't have a coordinate. So what am I going to need to do? I'm going to need to geocode. And so we show how easy it is to do some quick geocoding. We geocode just based on the city. So here is the New York example. I'm assuming Bayside is like the geometric center of New York. And so that's where we're getting our point there. But when we throw it on a map, it'll work out just fine. We assign latitudes and longitudes to all of them. And then we pick only unique detentions. So if you were transferred back and forth to the same place like 3 times, we'll just count it only once. And so this is like 12 lines of code, but if we smushed it up further, we could cut that down. Here we go. We can have a slippy map, meaning that we can interact with it. We can move it around. You can zoom in, not surprising, initial detention in New York City. So it's going to be concentrated on New York City, right? But then I think the like more interesting question is like, where else? So like of the folks initially detained in the New York City metro area, where are they ending up? There's some stuff further up and out, Alabama, some Florida, but actually like Louisiana was the hotspot here. So Alexandria, Jenna, and then a smaller one in Imbecile. Now, then we can ask this question of, let's just look at all those facilities that are in Louisiana. We see there's an Alexandria staging facility, a LaSalle detention facility, and Imbecile detention facility. So this could be useful information to researchers and advocates saying like the most common place that they're going is there. Maybe we want to direct resources. Maybe we want to talk to other nonprofits and make sure that they're like have folks on the ground there. I don't know. I'm not that subject matter expert, but I think this is the kind of stuff that when we work with those folks that we learn about, hopefully it's helpful. In terms of exploring transfer patterns, again, just a little bit more formatting magic. And here we do create our data set. So here, Varick Street Processing Center, that would be downtown to Hudson County Jail is our top transfers. New York City Holding Facility to Varick is our next one, and so on. This as in itself of itself is a useful data set, but let's say we want to show this to somebody and make a clear point. And then we just quickly show how to make a Sankey diagram. And again, like basically 3 lines of code to show the flows in between. So here, let's go look at Varick Street Processing Center. We see that Hudson County, Bergen County, Orange County. But then when we're transferring out of like the region, it's Alexandria. Also Essex County Jail coming to Alexandria. And then there's also some transfers between San LaSalle and also Alexandria. And so you can start asking some questions, answering some questions with this kind of data. We're only showing the top like 30 locations here. We like upped it, then it gets a little crazy, more to explore. Cool. So almost there. I think the thing I want to just flag about like some of the functionality is, let's say I was a researcher and this was my private data and I like did this on the hub and I'm like, wait a second, is it private to me? And so this notebook is actually inside my, you see Dowd, that's me, my data repo, and we can see it right there. But if we go over to the sort of demo account I set up today, and let's just refresh it. Do we believe it's not there? It is not there because it is private to my container, to my volume. And so that sort of data is protected, which is great. Other thing I'll show again is just that all of this is on GitHub, and the GitHub repo is open, and Dowd will be sharing more of that info. And whenever we update the repo, it updates the hub. And I think that's it for me. I'm going to pass it back to Dowd.
Thanks, Luisa and Michael, for the very thorough overview of the technical and the demo. So I'm going to start wrapping things up. What did users think? What did the immigration community, research community think about this? So I think our feedback fell into 4 main categories. First 2 are not really surprising because it's what we sought out to do. Yes, the data is useful. I like going here, getting the data. This is useful stuff. And yes, it's like actually formatted for me to like actually upskill and use this to upskill not just myself, but also possibly my organization. But 2 pieces of feedback were a little surprising in a very positive way. So users essentially saw the ability to run these notebooks on jobs and do it at a regular pace, and also to store the outputs or visuals in like a notebook container, and then be able to share it out with their colleagues. They said, oh, wait, I can use this to automate common data requests. And I need these data sets scraped regularly. That's because certain questions regularly get asked of me. So we see that was a growth direction for the data repo infrastructure, enabling some way for users to actually like operationalize some of like their data processes, like within their organization. It could be an opportunity to grow use case of this a little further. And then once users also saw the platform, they started understanding, oh, like this is a platform where I can like share data with a certain community of people like, that I want to share data with. And so we went back to that question about FOIA data. Something that researchers have told us is that we try not to duplicate work in the field with FOIA requests, but people file the same FOIA requests. So we're talking to immigration researchers about ways like, hey, is this a way in which we can get people like this community to share and like actually use this as a platform to talk about FOIA data as well, or data sharing just more generally. The takeaways are we sought out to build something for this community of immigration researchers, but as we built it out, we realized like this could actually be useful possibly for other organizations too, people with emerging data teams, people who might have needs or like desires to operationalize data processes, upskilling within organizations or teams, and like just generally like communities needing like regulated data or insight sharing. That led us to why we came here today. We were like, oh, I don't know if you want to access this. If you do, you can go to bit.ly/data-repo-MVP, where we just made everything open for you guys. If you guys are interested in contributing, feel free to submit an issue or pull request. I don't know if any of you guys are working in immigration. I doubt it. But if we're interested in always getting more immigration data sets to help this community of researchers, probably more likely is you might be interested in spinning up your own data repository, or you can call it something else. I don't care. But want to do that, or we have instructions on how to do that. And generally, we just wanted to make ourselves available. We love meeting new people. So talk to us. Like if you have feedback, ideas, or like want to contribute somehow, you can email us. Our team email is tech_, that's not a space, product@emersoncollective.com. And we're also thinking about having office hours just generally to engage with data-minded people. Contact us for details. We're thinking sometime in March. And lastly, we're hiring. You can go into our website, emersoncollective.com/careers, and let us know if anyone's interested in doing some cool work with us. Thanks.
Question. I think it's a clarifying question. If you go back with one, you were saying folks were interested in describing regularly. Does that like schedule batch jobs so that they can and does that like how do they use it? Like presentations or just is it like a kicker or that updates certain information regularly for these researchers?
So we're supposed to repeat the question. So the question was if automating data requests or something like that is really referring to batch jobs, and how does that look?
How do they use it? Yeah.
Right.
So I think from the folks you've talked to, it isn't so much like a daily thing, but it could be like a weekly or bi-weekly reporting that they're doing. So they're keeping track of different metrics that are coming in or website change, stuff like that. It's not as like a real time, but it's still current.
Okay, so the question was, how was the scheduling done with respect to the technology?
Yeah, so for right now, it's set up as a GitHub action. So we set it up with the GitHub action script and all that stuff. I have extracted the code out of the notebook for that sort of thing. Again, we're looking for more. If there's more examples where it makes sense to scrape regularly, again, it's that cadence of update. But yeah, so we're doing it right now.
And I would like to add like how it looks for the user technically. I saw that there's like a set of notebooks that we do share with all the users. And then like when one of the data sets runs or one of the notebooks breaks and then we have to fix it, then like the admin scripts push out the change to all the users. So there are some data sets and notebooks that we take accountability for in terms of maintaining the data quality and integrity, but the updates don't update the users like anything that they touched unless they ask us to. The question was about if there are plans to scale this infrastructure outside of immigration. And the answer is we are very interested in doing that. We actually, our second vertical at Emerson is around education. And we have not yet started like the discovery on the user research of what the differences in terms of data needs for education researchers are from immigration researchers are. But Ada here would probably love to talk to you about it afterwards.
And if we were to do that, imagine it either unlikely, but if it ever was very good, not so that data needs to be private, potentially for an education, BII in there or something like that. So there are just considerations around data privacy, but we would still give the practices around how we did that. Well, that's cool, but to be able to enable other organizations to create this environment within their own organization, or somebody else can send us out open source and just be like, let's snap your notebooks and data sets. So it's out there for people to kind of however they want. Meeting this earlier on, but how long did it take to create this from the ADN to getting the final product, the demo that we're seeing today?
So the question was about how long, or essentially what the timeline was. I would say like the user research took like maybe 3 months, 4 months. And then I think the development really took 1 to 2 months.
And it will be early. And there were ideas to create a workflow. And I think initially it was going to be running and then those in GitHub where you can download the repository based on Active 3. Or so then that's when I brought in at our director of engineering and decided to write it for the environment and then set up all the actions. So that whole process was pretty that's probably about fair market for all of our part after creating the future notebook and stuff like that. But
Yeah, I'd say probably like a month at like 25% time. And then it was easier to write the script to deal with the data than it was to do all the documentation. So I would say like a month, 50% time. And then, like I said, we're working on other things. So in our heads, it took a couple of months in reality. It was just like in terms of the environment and like linking data sets and some of the stuff we pre-downloaded just for folks if they get into the repo and it's already there. And it was some of the stuff around when you open a Colab notebook, you don't actually have a backend environment until you mount a drive. And so there was just some stuff like that, you know, and just, like installing the library. Like we were just trying to make lower the lift for folks like when they get in there, because you need a Python and you get in and you run that like pip install 15 times and there's all that other stuff showing up. It can get a little, did I break something? And now at least they can just get in there and see if, but you could totally run them in Colab. Like, yeah, nothing wrong with Colab. It's just that's why we landed on.
Question was like, what would essentially be the transition point between what we have here and like a user maybe needing to go on to something that's more, yeah, I think that's a lot of things, probably like amount of users. Like right now, we showed you the admin view. It's just like from a simple administration standpoint, it's probably gets really cumbersome to manage all the users when there are like more lines and less lines. And I think the other thing is also like just computing power. It's, I don't know, it's depending on how these organizations like grow, will their data needs like actually require more compute power? I don't know. You can imagine where the data sets that they start to work with become like really large, like big data might not support that unless we upgrade our own cloud, but maybe we will, maybe we won't. But yeah.
There's some on our Kubernetes. We haven't built it up so big. I would say all the things that said, and then also just like probably personal comfort and preference. Like my guess is as folks get like more comfortable coding, they might start being like more customize their coding environment, things like that, and living outside, which is great because our hope is